From the University of Notre Dame, I'm Andy Fuller. Welcome to Notre Dame Stories. On March 23rd, Ukrainian Metropolitan Archbishop Borys Gudziak was announced as the keynote speaker at Notre Dame's 177th commencement ceremony coming up in May. 10 days earlier, Archbishop Gudziak sat down for an interview for the Henry Nouwen Now and Then podcast, produced by the Henry Nouwen Society. By way of context, Henry Nouwen was a Dutch-born Catholic priest who, among other things, taught psychology at Notre Dame for a time. The society that bears his name is dedicated to advancing Nouwen's spiritual vision. In this podcast episode, host and Nouwen Society Executive Director Karen Pascal speaks with Archbishop Gudziak about his background and his perspective on the ongoing war in Ukraine. I'll be back to close out the show, but for now, here's Karen.
Well, I know that you today are the Archbishop Metropolitan of the Ukrainian Catholic Archparchy of Philadelphia. Today you represent Ukrainians in the United States, but you're someone who spent a lot of time in Ukraine. Maybe you want to give us a little bit of your history and then give us a sense of an update from your perspective of what's happening. It is an incredible time we're living through. Our hearts are breaking, but I can't imagine more so than what you might be feeling.
My story is kind of meandering and complex. I was born in Syracuse, not too far away from where you are, in New York State. And I met the man who was the head of the illegal Ukrainian Catholic Church. He was exiled in 1963. I met him as a 7-year-old in 1968. And then after college, I went to live and study with him in Rome, and I became a seminarian for Ukraine in 1980 when, it was like becoming a seminarian for a diocese on Mars. You couldn't go there. But after 3 years in Rome, I went to Harvard to do graduate work. I was kind of a slow learner, so I was in the program for 9 years. And the first of those 2 years coincided with Henry's 2 years at Harvard. And I had read a book in Rome by this author. I was very impressed by it. I thought it was called, his last name was Nouwen. And I remember reading it, because he was at Yale. It said he's at Yale. I remember reading it and saying, boy, wouldn't it be wonderful if there was somebody like this at Harvard, since I was already going there. And lo and behold, after one semester, I discovered that this Henry Nouwen guy is at the Divinity School. So I took his course. I started going to the daily prayer at his house, and those of you who are familiar with Henry's life, that was kind of the foundation of his life and of his day. We had half an hour of the office, then half an hour of silence, and then the Mass, the Eucharist. There were about 10 of us that were daily regulars. So we got to know each other basically in prayer and silence. And that went on over the first 2 years. Henry would spend one semester traveling, but it was the spring semester of 84 and 85 that we were together, that I was kind of in his circle. And it took me a while to finish my doctorate. In 92, I went to Ukraine. But in the interim, Henry moved to Lars Daybreak, and I started coming there. And then when I moved to Ukraine, at the invitation of Zanya Kushpeta, who was at Daybreak, and myself, Henry came twice to Ukraine, and he wrote a diary about it, which the original hasn't been published, but the Ukrainian was published in the fall on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of Henry's date. And immediately after the publication, I had a chance to present it in New York City to President Zelensky, because it really is a good snapshot of what post-Soviet Ukraine was like in the early 90s and mid-90s. So, yes, Henry had an incredible impact on my life. I pray for him, daily, and he's with me. And he, people in Ukraine, not too many knew him directly, But those who see, how I live, how I speak, I think might be able to identify how Henry influenced my spirituality and the way I try to communicate.
It's interesting because for those of us in North America, and probably for those of us who are not a part of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, we're not really familiar with that reality that your church was illegal in Russia for almost 43 years, from 1946 to 1989.
Correct, yeah.
It was an underground church. It was a church in the catacombs. Tell us a little bit about that and what happened. How did it come out?
Sure. Well, this is very pertinent to what is happening today. In the last 250 years, every time there's been a Russian occupation of a part of Ukraine where the Ukrainian Catholic Church ministered, the church gets strangled. It can take a year or two, sometimes a decade or 2 decades. But sooner or later, the church is strangled and even rendered illegal. And from, as you said, from 46 to 89, it was illegal, and it actually was the biggest illegal church in the world. And it seemed like they were, extinguishing it, because out of 3,000 priests who were there before the war in 39, for about 4 million faithful, there were only 300 left by 1985. This is the time when I was introducing Henry to this world, and he took great interest in it. And now we're back at 3,000 priests. We have kind of 800 seminarians for the global community of about 5 million Ukrainian Catholics. So this is a sign of miracles, of the power of prayer, of the grace that comes from the sacrifice of people who give their lives with the ultimate love. They sacrifice their lives for their brothers and sisters. And that's why during this crisis, we, as a church in North America, are asking people to do 3 things: to pray, because prayer moves mountains, to be well informed, and to help where they can.
Well, it's one of the reasons we think it's so important that we get a chance to talk with you today, because I would like to echo those words to our audience for Henry Now and Then, because I know Henry would be wanting more than anything to be alongside you and helping in all of this. So I would echo that we want to pray. We want to be well informed about what's going on and do whatever we can to help. And today, we will put links to anything that you are recommending, along with what we would like to put out there. Here, I'm based in Canada. In Canada, we have the largest expatriate community from the Ukraine. Over 1 million people have come to Canada from the Ukraine. So we have a great love for our Ukrainian Canadians who have added so much to Canada over the years. So our hearts are one with you in that. But let me just, at this point, really ask you maybe to give us a little bit of an understanding. I mean, I have to admit I was ignorant about, and it really hit me, this whole business about how Putin and the Russian Orthodox Church plays a part in Putin's plans. I think it would be interesting for us to understand, because it sounds like the head of the Russian Orthodox Church just wants to take back everything in Ukraine. That's part of the vision, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's a sad story. All Christian churches are revisiting their history and repenting about their role in colonialism and empire building. Jesus, wasn't about building empires, and the kingdom of God is not a colonizing phenomenon. It's a community of love, of service, of going down instead of, building yourself up, on thrones that are supported by nuclear missiles. So what is happening is that 16 days ago, on February 24th, Putin escalated a war that had actually been going on for 8 years. 14,000 people had been killed, and it really devastated Ukraine's economy. The purchase power of the Ukrainian currency already in 2014 lost 2/3 of its value. So people lost 2/3 of their savings, and the value of their salaries went down by 2/3. And he thought the country would collapse. He was bleeding it by waging the war in Donbass and by annexing Crimea. Well, it didn't collapse because Ukraine had in 1991 900,000 troops when it came out of the Soviet Union, but it was not interested in war. And by 2014, there were 6,000 battle-ready troops left. 6,000 out of 900,000.
Wow!
It also was one of the great holders of nuclear weapons. In the early 90s, Ukraine had the third biggest nuclear arsenal after the U.S. and Russia. Ukraine had more nukes than China, France, and the United Kingdom put together. And in 1994, Ukraine unilaterally became the first country to disarm its nuclear arsenal, receiving in exchange territorial guarantees from Russia, France, United Kingdom, and the United States. And, the people wanted to go forward. There were 15 million people killed through the world wars and the totalitarian regimes, of course, first and foremost the Soviets, the communists, but also the Nazis. And people didn't want to go back to that totalitarianism. They wanted democracy. They wanted transparency. When they had presidents who did not hold to these principles, they voted them out. There's been 6 presidents in the 30 years of Ukrainian independence. In Russia, never in Russian history has a president been voted out of office. And the real reason for this, the first war in 2014, and now its escalation, making it, really a comprehensive war, is not the danger of NATO. NATO is a defensive alliance, and it had no business or interest or desire to encroach on Russian territory. I just described to you how Ukraine demilitarized. Ukraine was not a military threat, but it had a very dangerous disease for Russia. It had the virus of democracy. As Putin built up his autocratic, oligarchic kleptocracy, where there's a few people that can basically rob the country. These are these oligarchs that are now being sanctioned, but who have been, welcomed in many countries. Their money, filled investment accounts in London, banks in Switzerland. It was spent, in Paris perfume shops and the casinos of Monaco, for all these years, laundering this ill-gotten money. What democracy next door, what a free press, freedom of religion, a vibrant civic society in Ukraine threatened Russia with, is that this could undermine the dictatorship that Putin was building. And so he decided to crush it. There were different attempts. Already 15 years ago, he told George Bush, Ukraine is not a real country. He said 17 years ago that the collapse of the Soviet Union is the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. And he wants to reverse the collapse of the empire. He wants to return to empire. And Ukraine has, over 40 million people. It builds the biggest airplane in the world. After the U.S. and India, it's the third greatest outsourcer of computer programming.
Wow.
It's got 200 universities. It produces 11% of the world's wheat, around 50% of the world's sunflower oil. It's got some of the most fertile land in the world. It was called, for in the 20th century, the breadbasket of Europe. Hitler actually took train cars of Ukrainian land soil and tried to, transplant it to Germany. So Putin, has had a long-term desire to quash democracy in Ukraine, quash this virus of freedom, and to actually reconquer the country for a new Russian empire. And we're seeing, the aggressive, brutal manner in which he is trying to do it right now.
One of the characters that has risen to the very top in the midst of this is President Zelensky. Just that sense that sometimes there's a moment you're called into history and you stand up because you're standing up for the right thing. And it's been inspiring. I'm sure that's inspired others. But you're right. What comes back is this sense of character within the country, within the people who've made a choice that they want a free life. They want to have the kind of freedoms and democracies and values that are better than and are richer than anything that is being offered by Putin in the Russian vision.
Hopefully, I think there'll be a major transformation. There are very difficult days ahead. It's not inconceivable that Putin could turn to, for example, tactical nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
To knock out Zelensky. Hit a bomb that obliterates just 1/10 of the city, the government quarter.
Yeah.
He's already kind of activated the preparedness of his nuclear arsenal, and he's threatened that, anybody that opposes us will see a reaction that the world has never seen before. Mm-hmm. He's already done things that nobody expected. Yeah. The annexation of Crimea, the war in the Donbass. And now, yesterday, the maternity ward in maternity hospital in Mariupol was targeted. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs admitted they were targeting it because he said there were troops there. But there were no troops there. Yeah. He said there were no women there. But you see the pictures of the pregnant women being carried out on stretchers.
Yeah.
The mayor of the city said that 1,300 people have been killed in these 2 weeks in that city. It's totally surrounded. There's no electricity. There's a lack of water and food. People are dying. A child died of dehydration. The president pointed out that it's probably the first time since the Nazi occupation of Ukraine that something like that happened. And people are dying of starvation. It's cold. The humanitarian corridors that were agreed upon through negotiations in previous days were shot upon. Mm-hmm. And they became, as the head of our church, as Beatitude Sviatoslav Shevchuk said, they became corridors of death. So these are war crimes. This is state-sponsored terrorism. The idea is to generate as many refugees as possible, empty the cities of women and children so you can more freely kill the men, get the people out so the destruction in the slaughter of women and children will not be, used against you. But also the goal is to create a humanitarian refugee crisis in Europe.
Yeah.
There could be as many as 10 million refugees. When 1 million Syrians came into Germany, this shook up the whole society and the political system. If 10 million people pour into the European Union will have great problems. And that's what Russia wants.
Yeah. It's destabilizing. It's interesting. Earlier when you were talking about the humanitarian corridors, when Henry died, he had promised to come back to Ukraine and he was going to bring things that he thought were needed. And his brother Laurent Naun picked up that mantle, and Henry Naun Stichting, which was the Henry Naun Society in the Netherlands, has on a regular bi-yearly basis brought truckloads of supplies into Ukraine where it was needed most, and has supported the L'Arche movement that was there. I'm sure that you're familiar with Laurent because obviously Laurent was involved in getting that diary of Henry Naun's published, which was really wonderful. So in a sense, the very opposite of this incredibly evil and destructive plan. The opposite was, Christ's response in us is to love and to give and to pray and to believe and to be there present for our brothers and sisters.
Yeah. Well, Laurent, has become a good friend. Those who know him knows, he looks a little bit like Henry, and he talks very much like Henry. His English sounds just like Henry's. Uh-huh. And he made over 100 trips to Ukraine with big tractor trailers, which he packed himself with a few friends with all kinds of things, computers and desks for schools and, humanitarian things and things for psychiatric hospitals. And when I served as bishop in Paris, covering the Ukrainian Catholic parishes in France, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Switzerland, Lauren's house was kind of a home away from home when I would be in the Netherlands. We would come in with our priests, seminarians, our choirs for services and for conferences. And Laurent, loved us and welcomed us. And he's been an incredible friend of Ukraine and a personal friend and a friend of our church. Laurent, I think he'll be offended if I share this with you, wasn't too interested in what Henry was writing when Henry was alive. And in fact, Henry told me, my family, they're really not too keen on my books and, the spirituality that I care to share. But then he had a conversion, or if you will, he discovered the depths of what Henry was sharing. He discovered Jesus. And he became a very practical apostle. Laurent would give me hell a lot because, you say, you watch out. Are you really, mindful of all the poor around you? I was responsible for developing a university, so it was, an academic project. But we did, under Henry's influence, from day one, because Henry was there just as we were doing the feasibility studies, the planning in 93, 94. We opened up in September 94. We decided to build the school, the Ukrainian Catholic University, on two pillars, the two M's, the martyrs and the marginalized. The martyrs were those who in the 20th century, carried the faith through the totalitarian tunnel. And they met the greatest challenge of the 20th century, which was kind of the totalitarian attempt to crush the human dignity of the person. And we thought if we can look closely at that, we can learn how to face challenges in the 21st century. So we did an oral history project interviewing 2,000 of these people. And Henry met some of the people from the underground when he visited during those 2 years. The other M are the marginalized. And under, the influence of Henry and that relationship with Xenia Kushpata, we decided that the best way to address the trauma, the transgenerational trauma of the genocidal history that the communists left was to introduce right into the heart of the university our friends with special needs. See, people who've been traumatized, who've been violated, and who from their childhood are taught by their grandparents, you have to be careful of the other because the other is dangerous. The world out there is dangerous. You can get arrested. You can be sent to Siberia. You can be executed. You can lose your job for saying a prayer. You don't trust the other. So you put on a mask, put up a facade, and build a wall. And you kind of peek out to see if that other person might not have it out for you, might not be an informant. It really breaks down trust, even in the family. And, the archives now show that, wives were informing on their husbands, husbands on their wives, neighbors, members of families, people that work together, were conscripted to provide information to the KGB, which, was where Vladimir Putin worked. Our friends with special needs, they help build trust. They break down those walls and facades and help us take down our masks. Because when you meet one of our friends, they basically, with all their being, ask one fundamental question: can you love me? Do you love me? And so we've invited our friends with handicaps to be tutors of human relations in the university. They live in in the dormitory. They help in our cafeteria. They helped in my, office when I was rector, president of the university. They're part of our community, and I think it's the first university in history that has placed the mentally handicapped at the heart of the identity of the university, not as a social project, but at the identity. So it's the martyrs and the marginalized. And that is what Henry brought me into and helped us, kind of conceptualize. And this university, it has the highest incoming SAT scores of any university in Ukraine. So the most talented kids come to this school. It's academically very competitive. But we want to make sure that our competition is not against, the Beatitudes. That it's not, it's a competition to build each other up, not to bring each other down. And in light of, that gospel vision, this war is just completely devastating because it's killing, it's marauding, it's destroying. And it's very sad that, there are Christians who are publicly behind this war.
I am really struck by your phrase that tutors of human relations. I think that the Ukrainians right now are tutors of human relationships for the world in their sense that no, they will not give in to what is so immoral and so dreadful. And I'm really moved by that description of what's happening with your university, Martyrs and the Marginalized.
Karen, I want to ask you and, all the listeners that, are inspired by Henry's legacy, to be steadfast in your prayer, information, and support of Ukraine, not just this week or this month, because, the world's focus on Ukraine is going to change. But the trauma that already has been inflicted, and it might get much, much worse. Putin is announcing that he's not going to stop. He's going to conquer the whole country. And the only way he's going to do that is by reducing city after city to rubble. This country, these people are going to need the support of the world for a long time. So put the people in your prayer. Yes. And get the message out. Get your friends maybe to listen to our conversation. There's a lot of disinformation there. There's, the political extremes on the right and left have often been funded by Putin, particularly in Europe. Madame Le Pen in France, the right-wing presidential candidate in the upcoming elections, her party has been publicly, openly funded by money from the Russian government. Brexit was something that was supported by Russian funding and Russian disinformation. We see the elections in the U.S. and in other countries that are influenced.
Yes.
This is a global issue, and Ukrainians are the ones who are confronting it. And they're paying the dearest price for it. And I think they deserve the support of the world for a long time to come in the future.
Borys, I thank you so very much for that word, that challenge, and we hear you, and we will continue to hear you. We will not let go. We will pray, and we will be your allies and the allies for Ukraine, and not be silent, That I commit to, and I know that those that are listening today will join me in that.
Thank you. God bless you, and thank you for keeping Henry's legacy. And I invite all good friends and followers of Henry to come and visit a land where he found inspiration and where he left so many fruitful seeds that have given life to ministries, not only for the handicapped, but through the handicapped to the country. There's a university built on the vision that Henry helped bring to Ukraine.
Our sincere thanks to Karen Pascal and the Henry Nouwen Society for sharing this podcast episode with us. You can find the full episode linked in our show notes. Notre Dame Stories is produced by the Office of Public Affairs and Communications. I'm your host, Andy Fuller. Our music is by Alex Mansour.